first category of math problems on the ISEE falls into the category numbers and operations. Sometimes that's also called number sense. So instead of giving you a big, long, boring list of all of the items in this category, we're going to jump right into an activity that has you engage with these concepts and practice them. So on the board behind me, you'll see 6 different numbers. You see we have percents, fractions, exponents, even square roots. It's important to be able to know what order these are in and compare them to each other. So take the next 2 minutes, put these numbers in order from least to greatest. All right, so let's attack this problem. Now we take a look, it could be overwhelming at first. Like, oh my gosh, there's all these numbers, some of them are percents, some of them are fractions, some of them are square roots. So let's just start with each number and get an estimation of each number. Then we can go back and put them in order. So we start with 33%. Now percent itself, the word means divided by 100. So all we need to do with the percent is take it, if you want to look at it as a fraction, it's 33 over 100. Or if you want to look at it as a decimal, whenever we're dividing something by 100, all we need to do is move the decimal point to the left 2 times. So as a decimal, we'd move the decimal point here and it would be 0.33. So that should give us enough information to be able to put that in order. Moving on. 4/5 squared. Because the exponent is outside the parentheses, that means we need to we need to square 4 and 5, the numerator and the denominator. So 4 squared over 5 squared is the same thing as 16 over 25. Okay, but what does that even mean? Well, let's think about it in estimation terms. Is this greater than or less than 1/2? That's always a really good place to start with fractions. Well, in order for it to be 1/2, it would need to be 12.5 over 25, which would be half of 25. So we definitely know that it's greater than 1/2. So let's just start there. Okay, perfect. 1/3. Now, if you remember, we have 33% and 1/3, and at one point, those may look like exactly the same thing. But let's take this a little further just to see. So if we're dividing 1 divided by 3, if we're converting that to a decimal, it's actually not going to be just 0.33. because it doesn't divide evenly, it's actually going to be 0.33 repeating. So that 3 will end up going until the end of time. So if we look back and we're comparing these two, which one's bigger, 0.33 or 0.33 repeating? Actually, 0.33 repeating is going to be bigger, because for every 3 after that, even though that's only 3 thousandths, and then 3, 100 thousandths, and going on, or 10 thousandths, going on and on and on, that's still going to be bigger than just 0.33. Okay, moving on here. We have square root of 12. Now, often on the ISEE, you're going to be asked to estimate numbers. It's not going to be an exact number, but remember, we don't need to know exactly in a decimal or a fraction what square root of 12 is. We only need to know how does it compare to the rest of the numbers. So to get an estimation of square root of 12, let's look at what are some perfect squares that are bigger than 12, and what are some perfect squares that are less than 12. Well, we know that 9 is a perfect square, right? And the square root of 9 equals 3. And we know that 16 is a perfect square. And the square root of 16 equals 4. So even though we don't know what the square root of 12 is exactly, we do know that it's somewhere in here between 3 and 4, and it's pretty equidistant between 9 and 16. So let's just call it around 3.5. That'll give us enough information to keep going. All right, 60 over 21. So again, doesn't divide evenly. What do I do? Well, because we don't need to know the exact estimation, let's just look at what it's near. Well, 60 divided by 20 would be 3, right? So we know that this is going to be somewhere around 3. But here's the question. Is it greater than or less than 3? Well, 60 over 20, again, would be 3. But because the denominator 21 is bigger than 20, we know that you have to divide it by more. In other words, it's going to be a little tiny bit smaller than 3. So we know that this will be less than 3. Okay, and our final one, this is a little bit easy, because 0 over anything, it doesn't matter if it's a million, it doesn't matter if it's x, it doesn't matter if it's x squared plus 65, 0 over anything, if you have a 0 in the numerator, is going to be 0. So now we have pretty good estimations of these numbers, and we should have enough information to go back and put these in order. So clearly there are no negative numbers here, which would be the first ones, it would be the least. So let's start with 0. That's the first. Good. Next, and again, this is not 0, but 0 over 625. Next, we have our fractions, or numbers that are less than 0, between 0 and 1. So we have these 3 that are less than 1, but greater than 0. And 1/2 will obviously be the bigger of the two, and we already determined that 0.33 is smaller than 0.3 repeating. So let's put 33%, followed by 1/3. Next would be 4/5 squared. And then we have, for our final two numbers, around 3.5 and a little bit less than 3. So clearly 60 over 21, followed by square root of 12. So there's your final order: 0 over 625, 33%, 1/3, 4/5 squared, 60 over 21, and square root of 12. So to wrap up this activity, let's take a look at what were the skills and the strategies that were covered during this lesson. So the first skill was percents, and remembering that percent is a number divided by 100. The second concept is fractions. As you can see, we're all over this problem. And even though none of the 6 numbers that were in the number line were decimals, we still use decimals throughout the process in order to compare those numbers. So percents, fractions, and decimals, and the ability to convert between each of them is a vital skill that you'll need to know for the ISEE. We also covered exponents and square roots. So take a minute with each of these concepts and skills and rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. 1 being you just want to run away the second you even hear about that concept. 5 being you're so comfortable with it you could just do it all day in your sleep. And take a second to reflect on that. The strategy that we covered and we used throughout this activity was estimation. On the ISE, particularly in problems where you're asked to compare two values, you don't necessarily need to know exactly what the value is. You just need to be able to estimate enough about the value to know where it falls in comparison to other values. So estimation is a key strategy that you're going to be using throughout the ISEE. So we're now going to do a second activity to build on the skills that we've already been learning. So take a look at these numbers on the board. Again, there's 6 numbers, and if you look, some of them look pretty similar to the last time, except for this time we've thrown negatives into the mix. So go ahead and take 2 minutes and put these numbers in order from least to greatest. All right, so let's put these numbers in order. So starting all the way over here, first thing you may notice is that we have negative numbers here. So obviously some of these are going to have different rules. But if we look at this number, 433 over 846, is this, again, back to our question, is this greater than 1/2 or less than 1/2? Well, because these are even numbers, we can just divide each of them by 2 to know what half of 846 would be. So half of 846 would be 423. And we have 433 over 846. So clearly that's going to be a little bit greater than 1/2. Okay, next we have negative 0.7 squared. Because the exponent is outside the parentheses, that means we're just going to square this 0.7. So 0.7 times 0.7 is going to be 0.49, again, very close to 1/2. Because this is negative, any negative squared, a negative times a negative equals a positive. So this is going to stay positive. So we have positive 0.49. 45%, again, in order to convert a percent to a decimal, we just move the decimal point over 2 places to 0.45. Negative 3/10. pretty self-explanatory, and we can also, in our estimation, know that that's going to be somewhat close to a third, negative 1/3. Negative 121 over 60. So a negative times a negative, again, is going to be a positive. So that's going to have this whole fraction be positive. And because 121 over 60 is very close to 120 over 60, which would be 2, we know that this is going to be greater than positive 2. Coming back to our square roots, remember, we don't need to know exactly what square root of 5 is. We just need to know what perfect squares are around it. So let's look at square root of 4 equals 2, and square root of 9 equals 3. So we know that it's going to be somewhere between 2 and 3, and probably closer to the 2 end because it's pretty close to this 4. So we know it's going to be greater than 2. So again, if we come back to these numbers that we have, this one, let's put them in order, shall we? Well, remembering and to keep your negatives straight is very important. So the greater the negative, the smaller the number is. So which one of these negative numbers is bigger? Because 1/2 is bigger than 1/3, this is going to be the smaller number because it's going to be the most negative. So negative 433 over 846 is going to be our smallest number. Next in line is the only negative number that's left, which is negative 1/3. Now we can go into the positive range. Okay, what's the smallest positive number? Well, we're looking between 0.45 and 0.49, so clearly 0.45. So that would be 45%. And this is not negative 1/3, this is negative 3/10. Okay, 45%. Then we will have negative 0.7 squared. And then we have 2 left, which are the 2 numbers that are greater than 1. So we have greater than 2 and greater than 2. Okay, well, which one of these is bigger? Because this is going to be greater than 2, but this is just a tiny bit greater than 2, this number is going to be smaller. So let's put it here, negative 121 over 60. And then the last one will be our square root of 5. So in order, the final answer is negative 433 over 846, negative 3 over 10, 45%, negative 0.7 squared, negative 121 over 60, and square root of 5. So once again, to wrap up this activity, you might have noticed that a lot of the same concepts were tested. So we still have fractions, we still have decimals, we still have percents, and we still need to convert between the 3 of those things. Again, we have exponents, we have square roots, but we've thrown into the mix these negative numbers. Now, negative numbers in and of themselves, being able to deal with it, knowing the rules of negatives when combined with exponents, when multiplying a negative times a negative, those skills are incredibly valuable and very, very heavily tested on the ISEE. So again, take a minute and rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being the least comfortable, 5 being the most comfortable, with how you feel about each one of those skills. The strategy that we used, again, was estimation. Estimation is an invaluable strategy because sometimes when you're comparing numbers, you don't need to know the exact number. For example, remember with the square root of 5, we didn't need to know exactly what that was. But estimation always gives you a really great place to start and sometimes is all you need in order to compare numbers to each other.